The world has been about to end at least 8 times in recorded history. The checkpoint will say it again. 8 times. With specific dates. With confident predictions. With educated people, leaders, scientists, prophets, and entire civilizations convinced that the end was coming inside their lifetime. Every single one of those predictions has been wrong. And the checkpoint will tell you something stranger. The fact that they were wrong did not mean they were meaningless. Every apocalyptic prediction in human history has been a precise diagnostic of what the civilization that produced it was actually afraid of beneath the surface story. The eighth apocalypse, the one currently sitting in your chest at 3 in the morning, the one the news delivers in fragments every day, the one mixing AI extinction with climate collapse with civilizational decline, is the most psychologically sophisticated apocalypse the species has ever produced. By the end of this video, you will know what every previous end-of-the-world prediction was actually managing for the civilization that believed it. And you will know what the eighth one is asking of you, regardless of whether it turns out to be right. Before the first apocalypse is named, one thing has to be said clearly. The checkpoint is not here to predict whether the current end-of-the-world fears are correct. The checkpoint is here to inspect the pattern. Apocalyptic thinking, the belief that the world is on the verge of ending, often within a specific time frame, often connected to a specific cause, is one of the most stable features of human cognition. The anthropologist James Hughes, the historian Norman Cohn in The Pursuit of the Millennium in 1957, and the religious studies scholar Mircea Eliade have all documented it across every continent, every century, and every kind of society. The checkpoint will tell you what this consistency means. The persistence of apocalyptic thinking is not evidence that the apocalypse is near. It is evidence that there is something in the human nervous system that needs to organize uncertainty around a definite endpoint. An open-ended future is harder for the human mind to hold than a future with a date on it, even when the date is bad. The apocalypse, paradoxically, has a calming function. It tells the lonely future we know what is going to happen. The checkpoint will tell you, before the end of this video, what the modern person should actually do with this insight. Most people never notice this. Era 1, the cosmic flood. Roughly 40 surviving cultures around the world, Sumerian, Babylonian, Hebrew, Greek, Hindu, Mesoamerican, Chinese, preserve a flood narrative in which the gods or the cosmos destroyed an earlier version of the world, and the present world is the second draft. The earliest written version, the Epic of Atrahasis, was inscribed in cuneiform around 1800 BCE. The biblical Genesis flood was a later redaction of the older Mesopotamian story. The Hindu Matsya Purana preserves a parallel version. The Greek Deucalion myth tells essentially the same story. The checkpoint will tell you what this era was actually doing. The cosmic flood was not a prediction of the future. It was a narrative about the past, specifically a way of saying the world has ended before, and humans almost did not survive it. We are the descendants of the ones who barely made it. The cargo, the deep nervous system memory, encoded across dozens of unrelated cultures. That catastrophe is real, that survival is not guaranteed, and that the species exists by a thin margin. The cost of this era was zero. The flood myth managed an ambient anxiety that every agricultural civilization had. The knowledge that one bad year could end the city by giving it a story that placed it safely in the past. The species spent roughly 2,000 years inside this era, in which the apocalypse had already happened, and the present moment was the gift of those who survived it. Era 2, the Zoroastrian Cosmic War. Around the 6th century BCE, in Persia, the prophet Zarathustra produced one of the most influential apocalyptic visions in human history, and almost no modern person knows it. Zoroastrian theology held that the cosmos was the battlefield of two forces: Ahura Mazda, the principle of light, truth, and order, and Angra Mainyu, the principle of darkness, lie, and chaos, and that the battle would end at a specific cosmic moment called the Frashokereti, the making wonderful, when the dead would be resurrected, the wicked would be judged, and the world would be remade in pure light. The checkpoint will tell you what this era was actually doing. The Zoroastrian apocalypse was not primarily about prediction. It was about justice. It introduced the idea that the world's current injustices would, at some final cosmic moment, be made right. The cargo, the first appearance in human history of a structured belief that the moral imbalance of the present would be cosmically settled in the future. The cost was almost incalculable. Every later Western apocalypse, Jewish apocalyptic, Christian revelation, Islamic eschatology, modern secular utopias, is in some way an inheritance of the Zoroastrian framework. The checkpoint will say it directly. Without Zarathustra, there is no Book of Daniel, no Book of Revelation, no Marx, no 20th century revolutionary politics, and probably no modern climate as final judgment framing. Era 3, the Jewish apocalyptic tradition. From roughly the 3rd century BCE through the 1st century CE, in the Eastern Mediterranean, a particular form of apocalyptic literature flourished. The Book of Daniel, the Book of Enoch, the Dead Sea Scrolls. These texts were written by communities living under imperial occupation, first by the Seleucids, then by the Romans, and they confidently predicted that the empire was about to fall, that history was about to be wound up, and that the kingdom of God was about to arrive within a specific generation. The checkpoint will tell you what this era was actually doing. The Jewish apocalyptic was not primarily a prediction of future events. It was a coping technology for a population under occupation. It told the occupied people, this cannot last. The empire will end soon. Hold on. The cargo. The discovery that imminent apocalyptic belief is the most reliable psychological technology for surviving long periods of unbearable political and social conditions. The cost of this era was the disappointment that arrived when the predictions failed. Each generation of apocalyptic believers had to either revise the timeline, reinterpret what the end meant, or lose the community. The checkpoint will note one thing that almost no modern reader notices. The community that handled the disappointment most effectively was the early Christian movement. The failed political apocalypse into a different framework and survived, where the more literally apocalyptic Jewish sects mostly did not. Era 4. The Christians' millennium. In the 2nd through 10th centuries CE, a particular reading of the Book of Revelations produced confident predictions that the world would end around the year 1000, exactly 1000 years after the birth of Christ. The checkpoint will tell you what the actual historical record shows. The European population in the late 900s was, by every available account, anxious, repentant, and braced for the end. Pilgrimages spiked, charitable giving spiked, confessions of sins spiked. The Cluniac monastic reform movement, which transformed European Christianity, was partly driven by this anxiety. The year 1000 came. The world continued. The believers did not give up. The end was simply rescheduled. The year 1033, 1000 years after the crucifixion, became the new target. Then 1260. Then a series of other dates across the next several centuries. The checkpoint will tell you what this era was actually doing. The Christian millennium was managing the new psychological condition of being inside an institutional religion with a calendar, and the unbearable openness of historical time once the literal end of empire, which the early Christians had expected, failed to arrive. The cargo, the discovery that apocalyptic prediction, even when repeatedly wrong, can produce massive social and moral mobilization, repentance, charity, reform. None of those required the prediction to be correct. The cost was that this era produced a recurring social pattern: millennial movements, dated predictions, mass disappointments, that has continued in Western culture in various forms for the last 1000 years. From the Anabaptist Munster Rebellion of 1534 to the Millerite Great Disappointment of 1844 to the Heaven's Gate cult of 1997. Era 5. The Black Death. Between 1346 and 1353, the bubonic plague killed somewhere between 30 and 60% of the European population, possibly 200 million people across Eurasia and North Africa. Entire villages disappeared. Cities lost half their citizens in a single year. The checkpoint will say this carefully. The Black Death was not technically an apocalypse. The world continued. But for the people inside it, it was indistinguishable from one. The historian Norman Cantor, in the Wake of the Plague, documents the universal conviction across Europe that the end times had arrived. Confraternities of flagellants marched through cities, whipping themselves bloody. Apocalyptic preachers drew enormous crowds. The standard Christian apocalyptic framework was applied directly to the present. The checkpoint will tell you what this era was actually doing. The Black Death era was the first time in recorded history that an apocalyptic feeling matched up with an actual event of catastrophic scale. The cargo, the discovery that even a real, present, ongoing catastrophe is not the same as the apocalypse. The world continues on the other side in a transformed state. The plague era ended. The species adapted. The economies reorganized. The Renaissance, by some historical accounts, was the long social aftermath of the population having to rebuild from a near-death experience. The cost was the permanent imprint of the plague survivors' worldview on European culture. Every later European apocalyptic framework would carry the plague's specific weight. The knowledge that catastrophe is real, that it has happened before, and that the world keeps going anyway. Era 6, the atomic apocalypse. In August of 1945, 2 cities were destroyed by single weapons. By 1949, the Soviet Union had its own atomic bomb. By the late 1950s, the United States and the Soviet Union together had enough warheads to functionally end industrial civilization in an afternoon. For the first time in human history, the apocalypse was not a divine event, not a natural disaster, not a cosmic war. It was a human capability. The checkpoint will tell you what this era was actually doing. The atomic apocalypse introduced an entirely new psychological condition, the awareness that the species had, for the first time, become its own existential threat. The cargo, low-grade, ambient nuclear dread, distributed across an entire generation. American children in the 1950s and 1960s were trained to duck and cover against a weapon that would have vaporized the building above them. The bulletin of the atomic scientists' doomsday clock, created in 1947, moved between 2 and 17 minutes to midnight throughout the Cold War. The cost was the first time in human history that the apocalypse was not a story but a button somewhere on the planet that could be pushed by an individual in an afternoon, ending the species. The checkpoint will note one thing. The atomic apocalypse did not arrive. It almost did several times. The Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962, the Able Archer 83 false alarm, but it did not. The world continued. The fear, however, had permanently rewired what the next generations understood as possible. Era 7, the Y2K and millennial apocalypses. As the year 2000 approached, a particular form of apocalyptic anxiety emerged in the developed world, partly technological. The Y2K computer bug, expected to crash global infrastructure, partly religious. The second millennium after Christ, rerun of the year 1000, partly cultural, a general sense that the calendar shift would carry civilizational weight. The checkpoint will tell you what this era was actually doing. The Y2K era was the first apocalypse to be fully mediated, broadcast in real time in 24-hour news cycles, with apocalyptic preparation tutorials on cable television, with bunker sales, with millennial countdown clocks, with explicit content built around the fear. The cargo, the discovery that the modern media ecosystem could amplify and monetize apocalyptic fear at scale in ways that previous eras had not had the technology to attempt. The cost was the slow normalization of apocalyptic content as entertainment, the disaster movie genre, the post-apocalyptic novel boom, the zombie show as a major television form. By the early 2010s, mass media was producing apocalyptic scenarios at a rate no previous culture in human history had approached. The Y2K apocalypse, of course, did not arrive. The computers were patched. The clocks rolled over. The world continued. But the apocalyptic content engine that the era had built did not turn off. Era 8. This is the era you are living in right now. The algorithmic apocalypse. Here is the real issue. The checkpoint will tell you what is genuinely new about this era. For the first time in human history, multiple credible end-of-the-world scenarios are running simultaneously, are reported daily in real time, are debated by serious scientists and serious institutions, and are delivered into the average person's nervous system through a phone screen every few hours. The AI extinction scenario, the climate collapse scenario, the pandemic of engineered pathogens scenario, the civilizational decline into authoritarianism scenario, the geopolitical thermonuclear revival scenario, the biodiversity collapse scenario, the supply chain fragility into mass famine scenario. Each of them separately has serious scholars who consider it plausible. Several of them, by serious analysis, are more plausible than any of the previous 7 apocalypses were at the time they were widely believed. The checkpoint will not tell you which, if any, of these scenarios is correct. The checkpoint is not a forecaster. The checkpoint will tell you what the historical pattern strongly suggests about how to think about them. Every previous confident end-of-the-world prediction in human history has been wrong, including the ones that the smartest people of their era believed, including the ones that, at the time, looked much more imminent than the current scenarios. This does not mean the current ones are wrong. It means that confidence about end-of-the-world predictions has, in every previous case, been a poor guide to whether they would actually arrive. The checkpoint will say it directly. The historical record gives the modern viewer roughly a 1 in 8 rate of accuracy on confident end-of-the-world predictions. And the one case where the prediction matched reality, the Black Death, did not end the world. It transformed it. The cargo of the 8th era is the first time in human history that an entire population has been asked to host daily multiple plausible extinction scenarios with no closing right, no defined timeline, no shared ritual for processing the dread, and no break in the delivery. The checkpoint has watched what this constant delivery is doing to the modern nervous system. The body cannot tell the difference between an imminent threat and a constant low-grade signal of an imminent threat. The same amygdala fires, the same cortisol spikes, the same chest tightens. But the 8th apocalypse does not let the body recover. The previous 7 apocalypses had defined endings. The year 1000 came, the plague subsided, the Cold War de-escalated, the Y2K rollover happened. Each previous era's dread had a built-in resolution. The algorithmic apocalypse is structured so that no resolution is possible. The next news cycle arrives before the previous one's dread has metabolized. The cargo, a chronic, low-grade, never-resolving apocalyptic background hum, hosted by a nervous system that was originally built to handle a single acute threat at a time, in an environment that could afterward return to safety. The checkpoint will tell you what this is producing. The clinical literature is now documenting eco-anxiety, climate griefy, pre-traumatic stress, doomscrolling-related insomnia, and a cluster of related conditions that did not exist as named categories 10 years ago. The disease is not strictly the eighth apocalypse itself. The disease is the body's reasonable response to being asked to host an unresolved apocalyptic dread every day for years with no closing right. I lived for years inside the doom scroll, accepting the eighth apocalypse daily delivery and called it being informed. It was not being informed. It was the slow installation of a permanent low-grade background terror in a body that had no architecture for processing it. The first morning I stopped reading the apocalyptic feed before noon and held one small concrete obligation as the first weight of my day instead. The body's relief was almost embarrassing. The world did not end. The obligation did get done. That was the morning. The checkpoint started keeping a watch. 8 apocalypses. The checkpoint has now inspected every one of them. Era 1, the cosmic flood. The world has ended before. We are the survivors. Era 2, the Zoroastrian cosmic war. The world will end with justice. Era 3, the Jewish apocalyptic. The empire will end soon. Hold on. Era 4, the Christian millennium. The 1,000 years are up. Repent. Era 5, the Black Death. The end is here. It still was not the end. Era 6, the atomic apocalypse. The button could be pushed any minute. Era 7, the Y2K apocalypse. The systems will collapse at midnight. Era 8, the algorithmic apocalypse. All of them at once with no end date, on a phone forever. Every era was wrong about the literal world ending. Every era was right about what it was actually managing. The cosmic flood was managing the agricultural memory of catastrophe. The Zoroastrian apocalypse was managing the human need for ultimate justice. The Jewish apocalyptic was managing imperial occupation. The Christian millennium was managing the unbearable openness of historical time. The Black Death was, briefly, the actual catastrophe most apocalypses claim to be. The atomic apocalypse was managing the new self-extinction capability. The Y2K era was managing the new media ecosystem. The eighth apocalypse is managing and producing the chronic, unresolved, always-on dread of the algorithmic age. The checkpoint will say what every previous era's elders would have said to the modern viewer. The apocalypse currently in your chest is real as a feeling. It is meaningful as a signal of what the civilization is actually anxious about. It is unlikely on the historical record to be literally correct about the timeline. And whether it is or not, the practice the body needs is the same. Here is the practice. Every wisdom tradition that has survived a previous apocalyptic era gave a version of it. The checkpoint will give you the simplest one. Every morning, before opening any news, any feed, any algorithmic delivery, sit for 2 minutes with a single piece of paper or a clean note on your phone. Write one sentence at the top. Regardless of when the world ends, what is mine to do today? Then write 3 small, concrete, actionable answers. Not fix the climate, not prevent AI extinction, not save democracy. Those are not the answers. Those are the apocalypses borrowing your attention without paying for it. The answers are small. Call my mother. Finish the chapter I owe. Walk the dog before dark. Apologize to the person I was sharp with yesterday. The checkpoint has watched what happens to viewers who hold this practice for 30 days. The body's apocalyptic background hum does not disappear. The civilization is still anxious. The news is still delivering. But the body has been given an alternative weight to carry into the day. A small concrete obligation it can actually discharge. The Stoic Epictetus in the 1st century taught his students roughly the same thing. You may die tomorrow. Behave as if you might. Do your work today. The world has been ending for many of your teachers, and they did their work anyway. The Buddhist forest monks of the same period taught the same thing. Practice as if your hair were on fire. The fire is metaphorical. The practice is not. The medieval monastic reformers of the year 1000, who believed the world would end imminently, built monasteries that have lasted 1,000 years. They built them on the assumption that the work was worth doing anyway. That is the entire practice. The apocalypse will or will not arrive. Your one concrete obligation today will. Discharge it. The rest is for elders and forecasters and the long historical record to sort out. That is the practice. The checkpoint has noticed that this morning practice is almost impossible to perform inside a phone whose first input of the day is designed to install the 8th apocalypse in your chest before your feet have touched the floor. Drift inward is the small private room, the checkpoint built for exactly this kind of inspection. A place to write the what is mine to do today, hold the small concrete weight, and walk into the day with one weight you have actually chosen. It is not a fix. It is a single quiet page on a device whose other pages are designed to fill the chest with apocalypse before you have a chance to choose a different occupant. The ruling. The world has been about to end 8 times. It has not ended. It might this time. The historical record does not promise either way. What the historical record does promise is that the elders who survived every previous apocalyptic era did so by getting clear every morning on the one small concrete obligation that was theirs to discharge that day, and discharging it. The apocalypse is not yours to fix. Your one obligation today is write it tonight, carry it tomorrow.